So it can easily get to 30 hours uh, of me watching videos. So that's one thing. Uh, I try to stop and then we will see where we go. Uh, the other thing that I wanted to mention was, what was it? I'm getting old. Okay, that's it. But yeah, hopefully I remember and then I'm gonna read it. Let's get into this. We want to finish us strong today. And one other thing. Today is going to be the last lecture we're going to have, and we already discussed this before. We were supposed to do some practice today, but I totally forgot the last time that I was teaching this course. I would have submitted a single video per week, so that was like 2 sessions in one. So when I was looking at this, I assumed that I can finish 40 slides in 1 hour and 15 minutes, except that halfway in, I realized that I only finished almost case one. So, which is okay. Now we have to spend this session on the second case, which is a very important case study. So the first case study was a positive one. It showed the positive power of correct visualization. And then we discussed the stuff that Jonas Snow missed in terms of multiple dimensionality and multiple dimension point of view in the data, where he could look at different dimensions in the data and map it like that, or he can put data from other dimensions, from other sources that would correlate with this on top of this, and bring out more meaning out of it. And I gave you an example on that company that was cleaning gully system. I forgot the word was gully. So their job was to clean gully systems. And they had over 10 years of data of cleaning gully systems and both the condition of the gully when you reach to it, a picture of it before and after, and what is the new condition, and that's it. And from that, the example was that they could get the data from the traffic lights, they could get the data from OpenStreetMap, they could get the data from businesses in the cities alongside the gully points. They could get that from the city municipal, and they could get the data from the trees from the city municipal. And their gully system was the data they could understand. They could map it as a ground truth, and they could correlate it with another set of data, like the trees, for example. And if they could match and correlate with each other, then the two of them together would have created another level of ground truth. And then they could put other layers of data on top of it that maybe, for example, the gully system that they could not correlate with the traffic lights, but it would have, but the trees, for example, or the businesses could have correlated with the traffic lights. So the trees could have correlated with the gully system, and then the businesses could have correlated with the trees, and the traffic lights could have correlated with the businesses, and then the population could have correlated with the traffic light. And putting these on top of each other, then they would create a multi-dimensional model that could basically get data from multiple sources and would create a consistent model that would represent the growth of a city. And then they could stress test and do stuff with that. So these are the type of things. The multiple dimensions of this data is what was partially ignored by John Snow. Now, today we are going to talk about the negative case, a very famous one, that shows how bad graphics can have dreadful consequences. So that's that. Before we get to it, this is the last time that I can remind you about this, and I keep I keep bringing this thing up. So hopefully now you remember after the class is done. to be careful out there and take care of your health and make sure that you stay healthy and well by covering your cough and wash your hands and stay home when you're sick and try to prevent touching your eyes and nose and mouth. And our disclosures is the same. We are getting data from multiple sources and we are getting arguments from multiple sources, and you're more than welcome to go and read each of these separately. Our first announcement is about this ACM student outreach. If you're interested, send me an email. The second one is about this study that you're running. Some of you might have already enrolled in it. If you have, you should have received an email and you should have been scheduled for this week to go through your first session. This is a 2-session study. You will receive $45 to compensate you for your time. If you agree to help us with this, you need to have at least 6 months of experience in C or C++ program language, and you need to be over 18 years old, and we're going to look at the brain activities. And this study is going to continue next semester and probably the semester after. So even if you are busy this semester, you're more than welcome to approach me or Dr. Jean next semester and get enrolled in it. And if you already sent us an email and we haven't scheduled you, please send an email to me ASAP and I will respond it up and make sure you will be scheduled immediately. Because in our books, we scheduled everyone and we made appointment for everyone who expressed interest to us about this study. So if you did send us if you expressed interest in the study, but we haven't contacted you back to schedule an appointment for you, please send us an email and we will take care of that ASAP. With all that being said, let's wrap up with Dr. Snow's part. So even in the face of issues raised by a modern statistical critic, it remains wonderfully true that Dr. Snow did, after all, show exactly how cholera was actually transmitted, and therefore the prevented. Therefore, how it can be basically prevented. So, in 1955, the proceedings of the Royal Society of Medicine commemorated the Snow's discovery. A renowned epidemiologist who was Bradford Hill wrote that for close upon 100 years, we have been free in this country from epidemic cholera, and it is a freedom which basically we owe to the logical thinking, acute observations, and simple sounds of Dr. Snow. And here is the happy ending of the case study here. So the Snow had a hypothesis. He collected data on victims. He converted data onto map. Then communicated with authorities. Swift response of authorities resulted in a happy ending of the cholera epidemic. Now, if you look at his 4 logical principles, the 4 steps in analyzing data through visualization of data. The first one was placing the data in an appropriate context for assessing cause and effect, making quantitative comparisons, considering alternative explanations and contrary cases, and assessment of possible errors in the numbers reported in graphics. Now I'm going to go through this as fast as I can. Hopefully we can finish this in time. So the second case study. So the shuttle basically consists of an orbit which carries the crew and has powerful engine in the back, a large liquid fuel tank for the orbit engine, and 2 solid fuel booster rockets mounted on the sides of the central tank. Segments of the booster rockets are shipped to the line side, where they are assembled to make the solid fuel rockets. Where these segments made, each joint is going to be sealed by two rubber O-rings. In the case of the Challenger accidents, one of these joints leaked, and a torch-like flame burned throughout the side of the booster rocket. Less than 1 second after the ignition, a puff of smoke appeared at the aft joint of the right booster, indicating that the O-rings burned through burned through and failed to seal. And at this point, everything was basically lost. On the launch pad, the leak lasted only about 2 seconds, and then apparently was plugged by putty and installation as the shuttle rose, flying through rather strong crosswind. Then 79 seconds after ignition, when the Challenger was around 6 months old, a flicker of flame emerged from the leaky joint. Within seconds, the flame grew and engulfed the fuel tank, which basically contained liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. That tank ruptured and exploded and basically destroyed the shuttle. As the shuttle exploded and broke up at approximately 73 seconds after launch, the two booster rockets crisscrossed and continued flying wildly. The right booster, identifiable by its failure plumb, is now going to be to the left of its non-defective counterpart, and you can see a picture of the flight crew of the Challenger 51 presented at the bottom of this screen. So this is the case. Now, we are going to start by talking about the decision to launch the space and talk about a little bit of the moral of the story, and then we are going to get to the points. So on January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded and 7 astronauts died because 2 rubber O-rings leaked. These rings had lost their resiliency because the shuttle was launched on a very cold day. Ambient temperature was in the low 30s, and the O-rings themselves were much colder, less than 20 degrees of Fahrenheit. This is the whole thing. Now let's get to the moral of the story. So one day before the flight, the predicted temperature of the launch was 26 to 29 degrees. Concerned that the rings would not seal at such a cold temperature, the engineers who designed the rocket opposed launching Challenger the next day. Their misgivings derived from several sources: a history of the O-ring damage during the previous cool weather launches of the shuttle, the physics of the resiliency, which declines exponentially with cooling, and some experimental data. Presented in 13 charts that we are going to study today, this evidence was faxed to NASA, the government agency responsible for the flight. High-level NASA officials responded that he was appalled by the recommendation not to launch, and indicated that the rocket maker, which is Morton Thiokol MTI, Morton Thiokol Inc., MTI, should basically reconsider, even though this was basically MTI's only no-launch recommendation in 12 years. Other NASA officials pointed out serious weaknesses in the charts, reassessing the situation. After these skeptical responses, the MTI managers changed their minds and decided that they now favor launching the next day. They said the evidence presented by the engineers was inconclusive, that cool temperature were not linked to the O-ring problems. So the exact cause of the accidents was intensely debated during the evening before the launch. That is, for hours, the rocket engineers and managers considered the question of will the rubber warning fail catastrophically tomorrow because of the cold weather. The discussions basically concluded at midnight with the decision to go ahead. That morning, the Challenger blew up 73 seconds after its rockets were ignited. And the immediate cause of the accident and O-ring failure was quickly obvious. But what are the general causes, the lessons of the accident, and what is going to be the meaning of Challenger? And this is what we're going to discuss today. Here we encounter diverse and divergent interpretations as the facts of the accidents are reworked into moral narratives. So these allegories regularly basically advance claims for the special relevance of a distinct analytic approach or a school of thought. If only the engineers and managers had the skills of field X, their argument implies that this terrible thing would not have happened. Or for example, saying that the insight of X identified the deep cause of the failure. Or saying that, for example, in management schools, the accident serves as some sort of a case study for reflections about group thinking and technical decision making in the face of political pressure and bureaucratic failures to communicate, and so on. So, for the authors of engineering textbooks and for the the physicist Richard Feynman, the Challenger accident simply confirms what they already know. The awful consequences result when heroic engineers are ignored by villainous administrators. That's how they think about this. In the field of statistics, the accident is evoked to demonstrate the importance of risk assessment, data graphs, fitting models to data, and recording the students of engineering to attend classes in statistics. That's how they approach this one. For sociologists, the accident is a symptom of a structural history, bureaucracy, and conformity to organizational norms. Taken in small doses, the assorted interpretations of the launch decision are plausible and rarely mutually exclusive. But when all these accounts are considered together, the accident appears totally overdetermined. It is hard to reconcile the sense of inevitable disaster embodied in the cumulated literature of post-accident inside the experience of the first 24 shuttle launches, which were distinctly successful. Now we're going to get to how did the engineers at the MTI initially argue for their first decision. So regardless of the indirect cultural causes of the accident, there was a clear proximate cause, an inability to assess the link between the cool temperature and O-ring damage on earlier flights. That was the actual problem. Such a pre-launch analysis would have revealed that this flight was at a considerable level of risk. On the day before the launch of the Challenger, the rocket engineers and managers needed a quick, smart analysis of evidence about the threat of cold to the O-rings, as well as an effective presentation of evidence in order to convince NASA officials not to launch. Engineers at the TEOCL prepared 13 charts to make the case that the Challenger should not be launched the next day, given the forecast of very chilly weather. So drawn up in a few hours, the charts were faxed to NASA, and then they were discussed in two very long telephone conferences between the people and NASA on the night before the launch. The charts were unconvincing, the arguments against the launch failed, and then the Challenger blew up. These charts have weaknesses. First, the title chart, which is at the bottom left, where SRM means solid rocket motor. In here, so you cannot see my. Okay, sorry. In here. So SRM means solid rocket motor. So on this chart, like every other displays, it does not provide the names of the people who prepared the material. All too often, such documentation is absent from corporate and government reports. Public name authorship indicates responsibility both to the immediate audience and for long-term record. And readers can basically follow and communicate with the name source. And readers can also recall what they know about the author's reputation and credibility. And so even a title chart, if it lacks appropriate documentation, might well provoke some doubts about the evidence to come. Now we're going to go and see this one. So the second chart, which we see a low version of in here, goes directly to the immediate threat to the shuttle by showing the history of the O-rings on launches period to the Challenger. This varying damage, some serious but non-catastrophic, was found by examining the O-rings from the rocket casing retrieved for reuse. Describing the historical distribution of the effect endangering the Challenger, the chart does not basically provide data about the possible causes, which is only the temperature. Another impediment to understanding is that the same rocket has three different names. A NASA number, which is 61 ALH, the Kyoko number, which is SRM number 22A, and a launch date, which is handwritten in the margin above. So for O-ring damage, 6 types of descriptions break the evidence up into some sort of stupefying fragments. These O-ring damage types are erosion, soot, depth, location, extent, and view. And you can see those in there. An overall index summarizing some sort of overall index summarizing the damage was needed in here. And this chart clearly begins to define the scope of the analysis, which is a handful of various flights that experience some sort of O-ring damages. Then the next chart describes how erosion in the primary O-ring interacts with its backup, the secondary O-ring. Then two drawings at the right makes an effective visual comparison to show how rotation of the field joint degrades the O-ring seal. This vital effect, however, is not linked to the potential cause. Indeed, neither chart appraises the phenomenon described in relation to the temperature. So again, it's missing in providing that very important link that was the whole point of these visualizations. Then the next two charts further narrowed the evidence. The blow-by history chart mentions the two previous launches, which is the SRM 15 and the SRM 22, in which soot or blow-by was detected in the field joints upon post-launch examination. This information, however, was already reported in the more detailed damage table that followed the title chart. The bottom two lines refer to nozzle blowout, an issue not relevant to launch, to basically launching the Challenger in cold water, but they decided to leave it there. Although not shown in the blowout chart, the temperature is part of the analysis. So SRM-15 had substantial overall damage and also was the coldest launch date at 53 degrees on January 24, 1985, almost 1 year before the Challenger accident happened. So this argument by analogy made by those opposed to launching the Challenger the next morning day is going to be reasonable, relevant, and weak. With only one case as evidence, it is usually very difficult to make a credible statement about cause and effect. If one case isn't enough, then the question would be why not to look at two. And so the parade of anecdotes basically continue to this one. So by linking the blow-by chart to the temperature chart, those who favored launching the Challenger spotted the weakness in the argument. While it was true that the blow-by on SRM-15 was on a cool day, then the blow-by on SRM-22 was on a warm day at a temperature of 75 degrees. So this is going to be here. The second row from down. So one engineer said that we had blow-by on the hottest motor or rocket and on the coolest motor. And the superlative -EST is an extreme characterization of listing data. Since the total number of launches under consideration here is basically exactly just 2. So with its focus on blow-by rather than the more common erosion, the chart of blow-by history invited rhetorically devastating for those opposed to the launch in terms of the comparison of SRM-15 and SRM-22. So in fact, as the blow-by chart suggests, the two flights profoundly differ from each other. The 53-degree launch probably barely survived with significant erosion of the primary and secondary O-rings on both rockets as well as the blow-by. Whereas with the 75-degree launch, had basically no erosion and it only had the blow-by. So these charts define the database for the decision. Blow-by, not erosion, and temperature for two launches, which is the SRM-15 and the SRM-22. So limited measure of effect, wrong number of cases, and these are going to be the problems. Left out were the other 22 previous charter flights and their temperature variations and O-ring performance. A careful look at this evidence would have made the dangers of a cold launch more clear. So displays of evidence implicitly but powerfully define the scope of the relevant, as presented data are selected from a larger pool of material. So like the magicians, the chart makers reveal what they choose to reveal. That selection of data, whether partisan, hurried, haphazard, uninformed, thoughtful, wise, or whatever, can basically make all the differences, determining the scope of the evidence and thereby setting the analytic agenda that leads to a particular analytic. So, for example, the temperature chart reports data for two development rockets that are marked by DM, two qualifying motors marked by QM, two actual launches with blow-by, and the Challenger's RM25 forecast. These data are basically shown again, and this is a very strange collection. The first 4 rockets were test motors that never left the ground, missing or 92% of the temperature data. For 5 of the launches with erosion, and then there were 17 launches without erosion in here. But we cannot see those in here. And this is NASA basically ends up officially asked MTI to reconsider, and MTI reversed their original decision by sending this letter. And in there, they said temperature data are not conclusive on predicting the primary O-ring blowback. Now, let's talk about how did the engineers at MTI initially argue for their first decision. So, depicting bits and pieces of data on blowby and erosion, along with some peculiarly chosen temperatures. These charts set the stage for unconvincing conclusions. And these conclusions can be seen on these 2 charts that you see on the screen. So the major recommendation is that the O-ring temperature must be above or equal 53 degrees of Fahrenheit at launch, which was rejected. This writing implies that the Challenger could not be safely launched the next morning at 29 degrees. Drawing a line at 53 degrees, however, is a proved empirical result based on a sample size of 1. The anecdote was certainly not an auspicious case, because the 53 degree launch itself had some considerable erosion. As Richard Feynman later wrote, he said that the O-rings of the solid rocket boosters were not designed to rot. Erosion was a clue that something was wrong, and erosion was not something from which safety could be inferred. So the 13 charts basically failed to stop the launch, yet, as it turned out, the chart makers had reached the right conclusion when they designed it. They had the correct theory, and they were thinking casually, but they were not displaying casually, and that was the problem. They were unable to get a correlation between the O-rings and the temperature, and those of them who were involved in the debate basically concluded that they didn't have enough data to quantify the effect of the cold. So the displayed data were very thin, and as a result, it was not a wonder that NASA officials were so skeptical about the no launch argument, and advanced by and their arguments were basically advanced by the 13 charts that were presented to them. So if you wanted to compare this with the John Snow case, it was as if John Snow had ignored some areas with cholera and all the cholera-free areas and their water pumps as well, and would have just focused on something without considering all the other evidence that were laid out on his job. So the flights without damage provided the statistical leverage necessary to understand the effects of the temperature, and numbers became evidence by being in relation. So that was all we saw up until this point was before the decision was made. Now, in some degree, stupidity continued beyond the explosion the day after. And these are the results that are shown to the Congress when an investigation started. And even there, they couldn't do a simple job of connecting the links together. Now, let's go through that and see how the Congress is informed about what the hell happened there. And then we are going to see one or two examples of charts from Professor Top that clearly shows what the hell has happened in a simple scatter plot. He would demonstrate the whole thing, and any idiot would look at it and say, oh, no, you should not launch it. So, soon after the Challenger accident, Presidential Commission began an investigation. In evidence presented to the Commission, some more charts attempted to describe the history of O-rings and their damage in relation to the temperature, and several of these studies still didn't get it right. You probably can guess what is wrong here, but we just don't have time to go one-on-one on this. Or we've got like 20 minutes, right? Yeah. There is too much to cover. So, prepared for the testimony to the Commission, the chart above shows 9-liter rockets annotated with temperature readings turned sideways. A legend shows a damage scale, apparently measured in orderly steps. This scale starts with the most serious problem, which is heating of secondary O-ring, which means a primary ring burned through the leak, burned through a leak, and then continues in several order steps to no damage. Now, regrettably, the scale's visual representation is disordered. The cross-hatching varies erratically from dark to light to medium dark to darker and the lights, which is a visual pattern unrelated to the substantive order of the measured scale. A little code accompanies the cross-hatching. Such codes can basically hinder the visual understanding, unfortunately. At any rate, these 9 rockets suffered no damage, even at quite cool temperatures. But the graph is not on point. It is based on the test data from development and qualification models. So the DMs and QMs on the original charts that we saw. All fixed rockets ignited on horizontal test, and their stands at the Kyoko, never undergone the stress of a real flight. So these evidence, although perhaps better than nothing, and that's really all it is better than here, is not directly relevant to evaluating the dangers of a cold weather launch. Some of these same temperature numbers for test rockets are found in a pre-launch chart that we saw earlier. Beneath the company's logotype, down in the lower left of this chart, there is a legalistic disclaimer, typically known as a CYA notice, that says that this particular display should not be taken quite at face value, and you have to be there. It says that information on this page was prepared to support an oral presentation and cannot be considered complete without the oral discussion. So, such defensive formalisms should provoke disorderly skepticism. They suggest a corporate distrust both of the chart maker and of any viewers of the chart. In this case, the graph is documented in reports, hearing transcripts, and archives of the Shuttle Commission. So, this is the second chart. I'm sure you can see all the problems in here very easily based on the chart chunks and all of those. and it's immediately come to your mind like, what the hell? But let's go on this. So the second chart is a sequence. In the sequence is the most significant one. Shown in here are the O-ring experiences for all the 24 previous shuttle launches with 48 little rockets representing the 24 flight pairs. The rockets marked with the damage code shown with the damage code showing the 7 flights with O-rings problem. So launch temperature is given for each pair of rockets. Like the data matrix we saw earlier, this display contains all the information necessary to diagnose the relationship between the temperature and damage if we could only see it. And the poor design makes it impossible to learn what was going on. In particular, the disappearing legend at the hearings was a problem. These charts were basically presented by means of the dreaded overhead projectors, which shows 1 image at a time. So it's like some sort of a slide projector, making it difficult to compare and link images. When the first chart, which was the one with the 9 little rockets, goes away, the visual code collaborating that calibrating the O-ring damage also vanishes. And so the viewers need to memorize the code in order to assess the severity and type of the damage sustained by this 48 rocket chart. Now, the second problem is the chart jump. The chart jump is the second problem. The good design brings absolute attention to the data, yet instead of focusing on the possible link between the damage and the temperature, the vital issue here, which is being ignored, the strongest visual presence in this graph is the clutter generated by the outline of the 48 little rockets. The visual elements bounce and glows as heavy lines activate the white space, producing visual noise. Such displays priorities in the design of the graphs, and the charts should make us suspicious about the competence and integrity of the analysis. Chart jumps indicates a statistical stupidity, just as weak writing often reflects weak thoughts. So the other problem with it is lack of clarity in depicting causes and effects. So turning the temperature numbers sideways obscure the causal variable. And sloppy typography also impedes inspection of these data as numbers brush up against line arts. And so the O-rings on the monitors are depicted by little marks, scattered and appropriately encoded rather than being totaled up into a summary score of damage for each flight. This reminds us of Johnson's principles, which state that these problems are more than just poor design for a lack of visual clarity in arranging evidence, is a sign of a lack of intellectual clarity in reasoning about evidence. Now, the last major issue that would make the whole thing useless is actually the wrong order. This is supposed to link the temperature with the erosion, right? Except it's presenting everything in order that they occur. So it's all about the date that the launches happen. It's not about the temperature. So it creates a time series rather than some sort of temperature representation. So all the effects of temperature are hidden in here. You don't see it right now. Right? Can you come up from that and you find those that can be an evidence that low temperature is going to be a problem? You probably cannot, even though they all exist in there. Okay, so this was presented to Senate for decision makers to understand what will happen and whose fault is it. Now, let's go and try to fix this. So, the second attempt, Professor Tuff summarizes all data into a table with damage index. So this data matrix shows the complete history of temperature and O-ring condition for all previous launches. Entries are ordered by the possible cause, which is temperature, from coolest to warmest launch. Data in red were exhibited at some point in the 13 pre-launch charts, and the data shown in black were not included there. So Professor Tuff has calculated an overall O-ring damage score for each launch, and the table reveals the link between the O-ring disaster, the O-ring distress, and the cool weather, with the concentration of problems on cool days compared to the warm days. Now, here's another bad visual display of this. So, information display should serve the analytic purpose at hand. If the substantive matter is a possible cause-effect relationship, then the graphs should organize data so as to illuminate such a link. Not a complicated idea, but a profound one. So the little rockets must be placed in order by temperature. The possible cause is the temperature, so that's going to be what you have to show. So in this particular figure, the rockets are so ordered by temperature. This clearly shows the serious risk of cold launch for most O-ring damages occurred at some sort of cooler temperature. Given this evidence, we probably wouldn't have launched the Challenger at 29. In the miserably quantified style typical to iconographic displays, temperature is merely ordered rather than measured. All the rockets are adjacent to one another rather than being spaced apart in proportion to the temperature, along with the proportional scaling routinely done in conventional statistical graphics. It is particularly revealing to include a symbolic pair of rockets way over 29 degrees, the predicted temperature for the Challenger launch, which is happening here as well. So even after repairs, the pictorial approach with cube-little rockets remains ludicrous and corrupt. The excessively original artwork just plays around with the information, and it's best to forget about design involving such iconic and symbols. In this case, and basically for that matter, in nearly all other cases, this is really not a good idea to do it in this way. These data require only a simple scatter plot or an order table to basically reveal the relationship. And here is that scatter plot. So when assessing evidence, it is helpful to see a full data matrix, all observations for all variables, those private numbers from which the public displays are constructed, no telling what will turn up. And in here, a scatter plot shows the experience of all 24 launches per year to the Challenger. Like the table, the graph reveals a serious risk of a launch at 29 degrees. Over the years, the O-rings had persistent problems at cooler temperatures. Indeed, every launch below 66 degrees resulted in some sort of O-ring damage. And on warmer days, only a few flights had erosions. In this particular graph, the temperature scale extends down to 29 degrees, visually expressing the amazing extrapolation beyond all previous experiences that basically must be made in order to launch at 29 degrees. The coolest flight without any O-ring damage was at 66 degrees, some 37 degrees warmer than the predicted for the Challenger launch, which is approximately 5.7 standard deviation distance from the average temperature for previous launches. This launch was completely outside the engineering database accumulated in the 24 previous flights. And this is a much better representation of the exact same thing. If only they would have displayed one of these two, there were absolutely no way that somebody would have launched it. Let's bring it to a conclusion. Applying the 4 key tasks to the Challenger launch. The first thing is defining a message. We want to know what's the point of this display, what am I trying to communicate, and what is my message, and how do I make my message clear. In the Challenger problem, it was need to persuade management that low temperature can cause O-ring damage. Then the next step is choosing form. Should I, it says form, but it should be from. Should I use a table, text, or graph, or a visual? In Challenger problem, a table or graph to show relationship, a simplistic vision, not necessarily overcomplicated like the ones that are shown to the Congress, and not as stupid as the ones that are shown to NASA. Then the creative design. What design principles lead to quick cognitive processing and effective communication of the message? In Challenger problem, organize the complete dataset of events ordered by temperature, ideally on one page. That would do it. The fourth one, using software. How do I implement my ideas? Using software so that I control the software, and the software does not control the outcome. So a simple Excel scatter plot with appropriate scale and highlights would have done it. That was it. Those people didn't need to die. So in the 13 charts prepared for making the decision to launch, there is a scandalous discrepancy between the intellectual task at hand and the images created to serve those tasks. As analytical graphics, that displays failed to reveal a risk that was in fact present. As presentation graphics, the displays failed to persuade government officials that the cold weather launch at the cold weather might basically be dangerous. In designing those displays, the chart maker didn't quite know what they were doing, and they were doing a lot of it. We can be thankful that most of the graphics are not inherently misleading or uncommunicative or difficult to design correctly. The graphics of the Corona epidemic and shuttle and many other examples suggest this conclusion. There are right ways and wrong ways to show data. There are displays that reveal the truth and displays that do not. And if the matter is an important one, then getting the displays of evidence right or wrong can possibly have momentous consequences. That's it. Any questions? No? All right. So we are kind of have 2 minutes, and I think it's a good time to wrap everything up. Let me see. Is there any question online? No questions? Okay. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this class. I keep comparing everyone with the first session that we had, and now, even though there was just 2 of you and everybody else is online, I keep saying that you guys nodding head, and you were looking at those rocket displays and saying, thinking like this is stupid. I'm happy that you can get it now. In the beginning, if I would have shown you one of these, you would have said, oh, that's a very interesting display, right? It's cool, there are rockets, that's awesome. Except that now you understand that that's just wrong. and I missed the point. So it means that you actually learned what I wanted you to learn. I want you guys to go and take a look at all the slides. Look at the summaries on every lecture, the means that I was trying to convey, and the information I was trying to convey, and learn about those principles of the design, how the design should look like. Okay? And always remember the differences between these two case studies. The one that worked properly and the one that didn't work at all and caused people life. Okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is, besides thanking you guys to attending the class and everybody else, wanted to mention that my lab is always looking for further students to join us. We've got something like 20 students in our lab now, and something around that for next semester. And there is no reason why we cannot have 30 or 40. So if you were interested in one of the studies that you're doing, and you're doing several different studies from robotics, social robotics, and autonomous drones, to game development, to a study of autism, doing brain-computer interfacing, the study with Dr. Zhang, a couple of others that I don't remember right now. And we are doing emotion recognition, facial recognition, and so on. So if you wanted to do research, the door is always open. Okay? Just send me an email. Let's have a chat. Maybe figure out what would be a good project that you've got. I have a student this semester who did image decompression on JPEG data, and basically improving the quality of images. And then I had the students who didn't do any programming, and they are running the show on our EEG study. So there are all sorts of studies in my lab happening, and I'm sure we can find a place for you if you're interested. So if you're interested, we can do independent research studies, or we can have thesis or any other means. And the REUs are also coming. The NSF REUs are coming. I think it's coming in February. The deadline. If you're interested, you can apply, and then you will be able to work either with me or Dr. Alawadar Tosin or Dr. Kalita during the summer on 10 weeks. If everything goes the same as last year, they're gonna pay you $600 per week, I think. Something like that, but don't quote me please. Okay? Any questions? No? Alright. I'm gonna be in my office on Wednesday. If you needed me, drop by. You don't need an appointment for that one during the class time. But for the rest of the week, till 13th, where is your deadline? You need an appointment if you need me. If there is a question, the easiest way is just send an email, and I'll try my best to answer it immediately. If not, keep sending an email. If I'm not in my office, I'm probably going to be in the innovative house in my lab working with the students. All right. Have a great day, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this semester, and I hope you learned what I hope that you would learn. And I hope that we can meet each other in future research and future classes. Bye.